There are three divine institutions that God has given, okay? Now, I want you to think about that, okay? There are three, how did I describe them? Divine institutions. Okay? Many times when we think about a divine institution, the only one we think of being divine is which one? The church. That's not true, folks. There are three divine institutions. The home, government, and the church. Wow. God has given the home, God has given us government, and God has given us the church. And all three of them are divine institutions. Now, we love to talk about two of them, right? And I, as a preacher, according to some brethren, are allowed to preach on two of them. You can preach on the home, and you can preach on the church, but don't you dare talk about government. I've been told that. I have been told that. By brethren. Are you kidding me? It's a divine institution. It's something that the Bible talks about. You can't preach about that. I don't care if it's in the Bible or not. It's government. Can't talk about that. Where did we get this mindset, folks? Well, I'll tell you where we get it from. It's point B there, okay? Folks, it's a highly emotional topic, isn't it? Okay? It is a highly emotional topic, and boy, people got all kinds of opinions about it, don't they? And your opinion and my opinion and $1 will get you a cup of coffee. Maybe at McDonald's, okay? Maybe at McDonald's, all right? Notice too, we've been taught, and I don't know where this topic came from, okay, that church and state are separate and ne'er the twain shall meet. Isn't that what they say? You know? Separation of church and state, preacher. I've been told that in times past, okay? Now notice this third point. Some religious people, though, have delved into political matters so deeply that they have become religious politicians. And folks, God never intended that either. Okay? God didn't intend for the church to become a political arm. Okay? Now, I need to teach what the Bible teaches about government, don't I? And I need to make certain that brethren understand that. But God never intended for the church to be the government, nor the government to be what? The church, nor the government to be the home, nor the church to be the home. They are three separate institutions. They have three separate responsibilities. But guess what? Each of them can rely on one another to accomplish what they are supposed to accomplish. Okay? Yes, ma'am. Oh no, he'd be fine and running. He's just a Christian running, okay? But as far as, what I'm talking about, a congregation becoming a political arm in government, okay? Take, for instance, the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is a political state in addition to being the church, okay? Folks, the Vatican is called the Vatican what? City, okay? It's the Vatican City. It is a definite political structure as well as it is a religious institution. God never intended that for the church. Okay? He never intended that for the church. He gave three separate institutions. Okay? And that's what He intends for us to have today. Well, the Bible talks about governments, and the government has some authority. We are studying authority. Therefore, we're going to study government. Oh boy. I can't wait. I really can't wait till next week when you're all stirred up with questions. Oh, man, that ain't going to be good. All right, notice point number 1, folks, and this is one we need to understand, and this is why it's so important. God ordains and oversees every government. Okay, and I've got several passages there. Look at 1 Samuel 2, 7 and 8. The Lord maketh poor and maketh rich. He bringeth low and lifteth up. He raiseth up the poor out of the dust and lifteth up the beggar from the dunghill to set them among, watch this, princes. Hear that? And to make them inherit the throne of glory. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and He set the world upon them. Folks, what gives God the right to establish governments? He created the world. That's why. He can do whatever He wants to. He's who? He's God. Come on. God can be involved in whatever He wants to be involved in. 2 Corinthians 20 verse 6, and He said, O Lord of our fathers, art not Thou God in heaven, and rulest not Thou over all the kingdoms of the heathen? And we got a bunch of heathen running governments. You know that? Now notice what He says, Thou root and rulest not Thou over all the kingdoms of the heathen. And in Thine hand is there not power and might? Is there none, that should be there, is there none that is able to withstand Thee? Notice Daniel 2:21. He changeth the times and the season. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. And then there's Romans 13:1, the one that we're probably the most familiar with. Let every soul be subject unto the higher power. For there is no power but of who? But of God. The powers that be are ordained of who? Of God. Now that's a tricky one, isn't it? That's a tricky one. Can we have evil men running governments? Yes, the powers that be are ordained of God. And yet there are evil men running governments. Folks, God can, if He so desires, set up an evil man in government. Okay? And the reason He does that is for His own what? For His own purposes. And who am I to question God? Right? He has a purpose, He has a will, He has an expectation, and here's something we need to remember too. If God sets up a wicked man in government and that man rules wickedly, guess who He will ultimately give an account to? The governor of the nations, God Almighty. Okay, He will give an account unto the governor. So just be aware of that. Notice this, and this is something we don't talk about very much. And Genesis, what does that word Genesis mean? Beginnings, yes. It's taken from the very opening words of Genesis 1:1. In the beginning. Okay, so Genesis, the beginnings. The book of Genesis is the book of all what? All beginnings. The only person that it's not a book of beginnings about is who? God. Why do I say that? Because God doesn't have a beginning. Okay? God doesn't. He's a self-existent being, isn't He? He is the uncaused first cause, isn't He? And very interesting to study that concept and try to wrap your mind around it. So when I look into the book of Genesis, and if that is the book of beginnings, then I ought to find what there? The beginning of government. I know I find the beginning of home there because in Genesis 2 we find God creating man, bringing her to the woman, uniting them together in holy matrimony, and they eventually have children and form a home, don't they? So there's the beginning of the home. Well, the book of Genesis is also the beginning of governments as well. Cain is the first person who is said to have built a city. Genesis 4:16 and 17. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch, and he builded a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. So Cain built a what? Built a city. Folks, let me ask you something. Do cities have to have governments? Yes. Okay, the only way they can run properly is for someone to be in charge of that city. Okay, there has to be some kind of officials that are ruling and reigning and maintaining peace and order in order for there to be a true city. We read about the formation of nations in the generations of Noah, Genesis 10:5. By these were the isles of the Gentiles, divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families, in their nations. See, God divided the world into nations. Okay? Now, at one time, all nations had the same language, didn't they? All nations had the same language until what? The Tower of Babel, Genesis chapter 11. Okay? And then after that, the nations were divided by their languages, weren't they? In that same chapter, Genesis 10, 8 through 12, we read about a great man by the name of Nimrod. Okay, I'd like to know more about Nimrod. You know what? There's just not a lot in the Bible about him. But boy, he is unbelievable. And Cush begat Nimrod. And he began to be a what? Mighty one in the earth. Wouldn't you like to know Nimrod? A mighty one. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. So there's one of his occupations. He was a hunter. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. You see, if somebody compared you to Nimrod as a hunter, you were one hunting dude. Okay? And the beginning of his kingdom was, listen to this, Babel and Erech and Akkad and Kelna in the land of Shinar. Out of that land went forth Asher and built Nineveh, and the city of Rehoboth, and Calah and Rezin, between Nineveh and Calah. The same is a great city. Y'all recognize any of those cities? Guys, there's two of them in there you ought to recognize. Babel's one. Remember the city of Babel? Okay, he's responsible for building that one. Notice the other one that's there, Nineveh. Usually we refer to it as the blank city of Nineveh. How do we describe it? I thought everybody know that. The wicked city of Nineveh. Remember who was sent to that city to preach to it? Jonah was sent to that city, was he not? And it was wicked. And guess what they did at the preaching of Jonah? They repented, didn't they? And changed their ways. Yes, the wicked city of Nineveh. And notice it was built by who? Nimrod. Folks, we've got all of these cities being built throughout the entirety of the world after the creation. And each one of them, there's what? There's governments. And those cities are formed into nations, right? So many cities in a particular area, and that represents one nation and another nation and another nation. Governments are being formed. He doesn't give all the details of the formation of those governments, but they are being formed in the book of Genesis. Notice Genesis 14. We learned that there are small kingdoms that had formed and had kings ruling over them. Okay? And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Edom, and on we go. Little bitty kings ruling over what? Ruling over their little nations, ruling over their little kingdoms. Kind of like homeowners associations today. Isn't that about what it's like? You know, each one of those little homeowners association is somebody's little kingdom. If you don't believe it, go to a meeting. Okay, it gets pretty rough. Now here's what's interesting. I skipped a point, didn't I? Now we've got all these little kings that are ruling in their nations. But guys, there was one nation, especially at this time, that was over all. And guess who it was? Egypt. Go back to D. Genesis 12, we read about Abraham entering into Egypt. At that time it was a great nation, and its ruler was Pharaoh. The princess also of Pharaoh saw her and commended her before Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Folks, Egypt was the world power at this particular point in time. Okay? In fact, they were so powerful that they ruled even into the land of Canaan. That's how far their territory stretched. Just a very powerful, powerful place at this time. So we've got a world power. We've got all these little powers, these little kingdoms that are under this world power. And notice the last point, eventually, God forms His own people into a what? Into a nation. True or false? Are they a spiritual nation? Yes. True or false? Are they a physical nation? Yes. Folks, the kingdom of Israel was both physical and spiritual. Okay? And God had them ruling and reigning in that matter. And Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shall you say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, how I bare you on eagle's wings and brought you unto myself. Think about that. God brought the world power to its knees, didn't He? Is that true? Yeah, folks, He brought the world power to its knees in those 10 plagues, and that's what He's talking about there. And how I bare you on eagle's wings and brought you unto myself. Now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people. For all the earth is mine, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. Folks, God specifically separated the children of Israel out for Himself, did He not? Notice He said, I will make you a peculiar treasure unto me. Sometimes we use that word peculiar in a wrong sense, okay? Were they different from everybody else? Yeah, they were different, okay? But they were also alike in a lot of ways as well, okay? You and I as Christians were different from the world, but we're also what? We're also like the world to some extent. We're just people, right? We have to work. We have desires. We have families, just like the world does. That little word peculiar means this: people set apart for a holy purpose unto God. I will make you a peculiar treasure. You're a different treasure. You're a unique treasure. You're one that I've taken and I've sanctified. I've set apart unto myself, and you will become a what? A holy nation. That little word holy means the same thing, doesn't it? Something that is set apart for a special use unto God. So God, for some reason, looked down from heaven, looked at Israel and says, guys, I'm going to make you a special people. Does anybody know why He did that? There's really only one purpose. That's right. He wanted a pure people through which to bring Jesus Christ into the world. Okay? So He makes a covenant with Israel. And He purifies them, doesn't He? Okay? He makes them different than all the other nations. Gives them sacrifices. They've got special laws that they have to follow. There are laws of what is clean and unclean, and how to purge evil from their midst. And folks, all of that is preparatory for the coming of Jesus Christ. Now, did the children of Israel follow the covenant of the Almighty God? No. They violated the covenant. Okay? They violated the covenant. And what's interesting is, upon their violation of that covenant, God did not have to honor His part anymore if He did not want to. But guess what He did? He did honor it. Okay? He honored it even though the children of Israel violated it. But He honored it based upon two things. Number one, the death of Jesus on the cross of Calvary. And number two, a new covenant being instituted thereafter. Okay? So that old covenant was done away. And now what? There's a new covenant. But He still brought Jesus through the lineage of the Jews into this world, just as He had promised hundreds and hundreds of years before it transpired. Questions, comments? Anybody? Jim? Oh yes, I mean it was a. Oh yeah, it was wicked, you know. And you had the fighting of those wars. Remember when Lot got taken? Okay, the reason he got taken is because 5 kings were fighting against 4 kings, and it was it was just like normal worldly stuff back then. They just didn't have social media to spread the news. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Yes, she wants me to explain separation of church and state. Okay? Tell you what. Somebody pull up First Amendment. First Amendment. Okay? Number one, the words separation of church and state are never found in the Constitution. They're never found in the Declaration of Independence. Okay, they're not found in any of our Founding Fathers' documents as far as the documents of government are concerned. Those words were found in a letter written by Thomas Jefferson to a Baptist church at the time. Okay? And there was pressure being put on this church by the government. Okay? And folks, guess what? The government has no right to be involved in our religion. Okay? You got it? Read it for us.
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or to whether people peaceably to assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances.
Okay, read the first part again. And we'll just stop at a couple of places.
No law respecting an establishment of religion.
Stop. The government can make no law respecting the establishment of a religion. Folks, our Founding Fathers came from England. Okay? And guess what was the number one religion in England? The Church of England. Guess who established it? The government. And if the government said you're a member of it, guess what? You're a member of it. They said, no, we're not. We're not going to be members of that government. So they come over here and guess what they say? The government cannot force you to be a member of a government. They have no right to establish a religion in the United States of America. Okay, so that's can't be done. Second part.
Or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
See, hear that? Or prohibiting the free exercise of that. They cannot make a religion they're not supposed to make a law that says you can't worship on Sunday. They can't do that. Okay, they have no right. That prohibits my free practice of religion, doesn't it? The Bible says that I am supposed to worship. They cannot make a law prohibiting the free exercise of my religion. Let me ask you this. We have a big deal today about homosexuality and transgenderism. Does the Bible address those issues? Yeah, very clearly addresses those issues, okay? May it come a time when the government says a preacher can't stand in the pulpit and preach against homosexuality or transgenderism because that's hate speech. They don't have the right to make that law. You see, they are prohibiting the free exercise of what? My religion. My religion condemns it. I'm supposed to preach what the Bible teaches. They have no right to make a law prohibiting the free exercise of my religion. Now, does that create problems sometime? Yeah. Because you got in the United States of America the Church of Satan. Don't you? Well, guess what? The government can't forbid that. Okay? They've got a right to have their religion. If they want to worship Satan, hey, worship Satan, right? Is there any other part of that? I think those are just the two parts, right? So folks, when you talk about separation of church and state, the Constitution, okay, the First Amendment, separates the government from us. It gets us out. It says you cannot make us worship in a particular religion. You can't formulate a religion, and you can't prohibit me from practicing mine. And that's all that the Constitution teaches about the separation of church and state. Okay? They are to separate themselves from what? From us. Get out of my life, get out of my business, get out of my practice of my religion, and you can't bind one on me. And that's as simple as it is. And yet, it's been taken and misinterpreted, okay, and has been applied that the church has no right to say anything about anything in government. And that's not true. We have a right. We have a responsibility. It's in the Bible. I have to talk about these things. Okay? Well, you know, that's just part of the setup of the. It's just the nature of the beast. Is that there are going to be some people take advantage of some situations, you know, and you're not going to be able to change that. And you know, it doesn't mean that the government's supposed to jump in there and correct everything. Okay, the ones that ought to correct that in the church is the church. Okay, they should have the responsibility of making their corrections within their own congregations. Okay. Very good stuff, though. All right, let's notice point number 3 very quickly. Folks, God's purpose for establishing the government. Mike, did you have something else? You raised your hand a while ago. You okay? He got dementia. He's gone. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's happening all the time, isn't it? Here's the purpose of establishing governments, folks. One would think God established governments for hundreds of purposes, since governments we know are so big. Wouldn't you think that? Here's what's interesting. That's not the case. There is one primary reason God has put governments on the earth, and that reason is justice, folks. Man. Justice. Christians see justice as the principal reason for the state's existence. Christians in politics and the purpose of government. The Bible states explicitly that the central purpose and role of government is to maintain order, peace, protection, safety, and stability in society, which in turn enables citizens to live their lives in freedom. A look at justice. Folks, justice involves two things. You ready for this? Number one, promoting and protecting good citizens. Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. Paul writing to the Romans about government. Do good, and the government's supposed to do what? Praise you. Notice what Peter says. Or unto governors, as unto them that are sent by him, for the praise of them that do what? Do well. Folks, if you and I live good lives, we're good citizens, we're honest, we're moral, we're upstanding, we're hardworking, we don't commit crimes. You want to know what the government ought to be doing? Yes, the government ought to be praising you. They ought to be standing up before individuals saying, y'all need to be like these people. This is the way you need to be living. We got it all mixed up, don't we? Because we're sure out praising the evil and acting like all the good folks are bad. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. Now notice point number 2. If the rulers do their work well, we will live in what? Peace. Okay? Go back up to B though. They're to punish those who commit evil. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to who? But to evil. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is a minister of God, a revenger, to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Well, there's some potent statements in that passage right there. You know that? I want you to look at one statement that he makes. He says, he is a minister of God. Folks, elected officials are ministers of God. Some of them don't know that. They don't understand that. They don't get that. But who put them there? God did. And God expects those people to do what? Serve Him. That's what He expects of those individuals. Notice too, they bear not the what in vain? The sword. What's a sword for? It's just for looks, right? To strap on your side, make you look good. No, folks, a sword is for death. That's why a sword was made. It's a weapon. Now notice, Paul says that a government is a minister of God, and he can do what? He can execute the sword, can he not? Folks, that's physical death. Capital punishment is authorized in the pages of God's Word. For he is a minister of God, a what? A revenger, to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Question, can you and I be revengers of individuals who do evil to us? Am I supposed to seek revenge and vengeance? No. Not what the Bible teaches. But God has given a place wherein that can occur. And who is supposed to do that? Government. Okay? Somebody does me evil, who do I go to? I go to the government. I tell them, look guys, I've been treated evilly by this individual. He stole my property. He took my cow. Well, we don't have cows anymore. He took my Lexus. I don't know. Whatever it is. Okay? And what's the government supposed to do? The government is supposed to maintain the justice. He's supposed to execute wrath upon the individual. Beverly? What you got, Bev? Oh, they have been now. A lot of times. I want you to jump down to C real quickly before we... Well, there's just so much here. We could go for months on this, couldn't we? Folks, leaders of our government are supposed to honor God and His Word. Got that? How do I know that? Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings. Be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Psalm 9 verse 17. The wicked shall be turned into hell, and all nations that what? Forget God. The legal code of successful nations will use God's words as its standard. Righteousness exalteth the nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Folks, how do you determine what is sin and what is righteousness? By the Word of God. It's the only way to make that determination. Sin is the transgression of the law of God. And righteousness is what? The application of the law of God. Our president, our vice president, our congressmen, our elected officials here in the city of Jacksonville, all the way to our little communities, guess what they are supposed to do? The first and foremost thing they are to do is read this book and follow it. That's their job. That's their obligation. And you tell them that and they'll laugh at you today. Yeah. Go read Deuteronomy 17 this evening. Okay, Deuteronomy the 17th chapter. In that chapter, God is predicting that Israel will eventually have a king. And He gives that king a responsibility when he first assumes the throne. And the responsibility is this: to write him a copy of the law and put it by his side at all times. Now, can you imagine that? What was the Old Testament written in? Hebrew. Now the king is told to do what? You write a copy of the law. Have you ever tried to write the New Testament? Do that sometime. It's in English, it ain't in Hebrew. Just go write the New Testament. Why do you think God wanted the king to write the law? Write him a copy of the law. Yeah, folks, when you write it, you pay a lot more attention to what's in it. It's in your handwriting, and you have to go slow, and you can't just breeze through it. Oh, I read it. No, you didn't. If you wrote it, you read it. You know it? And you'll see how much that king was supposed to know what the good book said. He was supposed to live by it and make application of it in the lives of his people. And so are rulers today. The wicked shall be turned into hell, and all nations that what? Forget God. Has the United States of America forgotten God? Yes. And we'll be turned to hell for it if we don't turn back. See, you're not supposed to preach like that. But folks, that's where we are today. When we praise homosexuals and transgenders, when we praise rioting and looting, when we praise murderers, when we put individuals back on the streets who've committed major crimes in the United States of America, when our elected officials can do all kinds of evil and not get 1 ounce of justice for having done it, we are a wicked nation. We take prayer out of schools, Bible out of schools. Oh, but we believe God. No, the only thing we ever do is say what? Pray. And you only do that in bad times. Folks, we've drifted a long way from God. And guess who established this nation? God did. And guess who can take it down? God can. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, they're big about that. Very big. Next week, do the questions, because the questions cover a lot, the rest of the lesson as well. So we will get into the rest of the lesson next week when we cover these questions. So you don't want to miss next week, because you'll get a lot of time to participate. I'm going to try not to be here. No, I'm just kidding.